apparently Street Songs was done in a month. That was it. Everything on there. Ghetto Life. Give It To Me Baby. Super Freak. Fire and Desire. Pass the J. All of that was done in a month. Right on time for another ride on the Groove Line with your boy Chris Stevens. Hopefully you're doing well out there. Today is April 7th, and it's a special day because we're going to talk about this awesome album from the late great Rick James, and of course it is Street Songs. Street Songs was released today, April 7th, 1981, on Gordy sub label. Of course, if you guys know, Middletown Motown Records. And I'm thinking about my home state of Delaware in Middletown, which is a nice city here in Delaware now. But yeah, Motown Records. They had sub labels, Tamla and Gordy, and Gordy was the label that Rick was on. And Rick released Street Songs after a couple of years of hits that people of albums that people really didn't look fondly upon. As you know, this is a Garden of Love fan account. I have a whole entire episode about Garden of Love, which you can check out on this channel. In fact, I will link that in the description below if you are so intrigued to check out my thoughts on Garden of Love. But yeah, Garden of Love wasn't a bad album by any stretch of the imagination. It was widely considered a throwaway album because Rick was in the middle of renegotiating his contract with Berry Gordy. And as we talked about with Stevie, man, Berry Gordy had to realize these artists, they got their own way of doing things. You can't just always pigeonhole them into one sound and then not give them the money that they want to have creative control. And Rick was no different. So Rick gave Garden of Love to Motown as just like a look, this is what you get. We can renegotiate, but I got to be able to do my own thing. And when Garden of Love flopped, he said, we got to go back to Buffalo, him and the Stone City Band. So he went back to Buffalo, hung out for a little bit, got the tempo and the vibe of the streets, and then went to the record plant studio in Sausalito, California. And apparently, this is according to the Stone City Band's Facebook page. You can check them on. I'm not disagreeing with anybody from the Stone City Band about a damn thing. But yeah, apparently, Street Songs was done in a month. That was it. Everything on there. Ghetto Life. Give It To Me Baby. Super Freak. Fire and Desire. Pass the J. All of that was done in a month. That was it. And just to talk about how amazing that album is, because I don't know if you'd call it a concept album per se, but you get the idea of the Buffalo streets that raised Rick James, or James Ambrose Johnson Jr., as he was, born as in 1948. But you get the idea. I mean, Ghetto Life is basically his autobiography. When I was a young boy growing up in the ghetto, hanging out on corners, singing with the fellas, looking for the cute chicks, trying to find some big fun, looking for some trouble for anybody that would give me some. I was young and crazy in the ghetto. I was young and lazy in the ghetto. And then he talks about, the second verse, this girl named Nancy had pigtails to her shoulders, couldn't have been much older. When you're left to your own devices as kids, that type of stuff happens. But yeah, Ghetto Life is his autobiography. Super Freak. Rick became the first black male to be nominated for Best Rock Performance because of Super Freak. Like, come on, man. Just an incredible album. I mean, we've already talked about Fire and Desire. I mean, again, you guys can go back and check out my thoughts on why Happy with Tina Marie is the better duet than Fire and Desire. But Fire and Desire is a classic because it gave The Quiet Storm its first true 80s hit. Now, you could probably argue that Larry Graham's One in a Million for the previous year could have done it. You probably could say the same thing for She's Out of My Life by the Kang, Michael Jackson. I mean, 1980 had some good Quiet Storm songs, but 1981 was when the Quiet Storm really just whoosh, and Fire and Desire was a part of that process. And the great story is that Tina had a real bad cold. In fact, she went to the emergency room for this cold. And Rick was about to get somebody else to sing that song, and Tina said, no, the hell you ain't. So Tina came back, cold and all, fresh from the emergency room, to sing that song. And it is one of those songs that Gen Xers and boomers cling to for simpler times when you start talking about music and the zeitgeist of the moment and all of that. Fire and Desire is absolutely one of those songs in the black community that you will have to rip from Gen Xers and boomers cold, dead hands. And I completely understand it. I completely understand it. It's a wonderful song. But in my opinion, I think Happy is better. That's just my opinion. But yes. Also, I mean, Super Freak itself, I mean, it's funny because his ex-wife, Tanya Hijazi, on his Unsung said he was just making fun of white dudes, with the vocals and everything. Like, we all have heard Rick sing before. I mean, we all know that's not Rick's natural voice. She's a very kinky girl. The kind you don't take home to my thigh. Yeah, like Rick was wilding on that song. Like he was clearly just in the studio noodling, cutting the damn fool. And it became one of the biggest songs of the early 80s. And of course, MC Hammer sampled that for You Can't Touch This. So, and then Rick was one of the first ones to say, yo, that's my song. I want my credits. And that kept Rick, from the poorhouse for the rest of his life, because You Can't Touch This went on to be a huge record in 1990. Like, listen, I was in third grade when You Can't Touch This came out, third or fourth, I can't remember. I know it was some point in 1990, but I know for sure that Can't Touch This absolutely was a record that was everywhere. And everybody, and even the OGs, even the older folks at the time, even my mom was like, "That's Rick James. That's Super Freak." I'm like, I was 8. I was like, "What's Super Freak?" She's like, "You're gonna have to wait until you're older to figure that out." Then, of course, that's when I found out. When I was like 12, 13 for the first time, I got a Rick James compilation cassette tape. Yes, this is back when cassette tapes were still a thing. And I heard Super Freak, I heard Mary Jane, and Rick just grabbed my attention in a way that no old school artist had at that time. Because you gotta remember, I grew up in the house listening to Philly International, and I was tired of listening to Philly International every damn Sunday. But guess what I listen to nonstop now? Philadelphia Soul Records. Thanks, Ma. But yeah, Rick was the first old school artist that just grabbed my attention as a young man. Him and Prince. Him and Prince. As a young kid, it was Rick James and Prince. And of course, Parliament Funkadelic. I didn't know George Clinton by name until I was a little older. But P Funk was there. It was Rick. It was Prince. Those were the ones that I gravitated to as I got to be, a teenager going through high school and all of that stuff. Michael Jackson was always Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson was popping, was it when I was a kid. I mean, Prince and Rick James were it when I was a toddler too, but I didn't listen to those guys until I got a little older, because that was the only way I could listen to them, because Prince was a little risque. And we'll probably talk about Prince a little bit as well. And Rick was obviously wild and crazy and out there. But Street Songs is just one of those albums that you can't tell. When I say certain albums, you can't tell the story of black music without Street Songs, is absolutely one of those records. Like, this is a dude who lived an extraordinary life. He ducked and dodged the feds. As he went AWOL when he was in the Navy, bolted for Canada, got dimed out by a manager who probably should not have known a moment of peace, diming out 17-year-old James Johnson, but that's what happened. Then he got free, went out to California, was supposed to be hanging out at Sharon Tate's house, and of course we all know what happened at Sharon Tate's house. And Rick got too high to even make it to the house. So, I mean, Rick James, and then of course he backpacked across Europe and all of that stuff. Like, Rick James just lived an extraordinary life. And then Street Songs to come out and just give you this vibe of what young black kids of his era, boomers that were now adults, looked at that time in 1981 as the good old days. I mean, you get that sense of what those times meant to people like Rick and different folks of that generation. And Street Songs is definitely one of those records. I mean, Give It To Me. I mean, we ain't even talking about Give It To Me, Baby yet. One of my favorite bass lines ever. Like, an absolutely incredible bass line. Like, that sets the tempo. I mean, the music video is hot enough. I mean, that beautiful black one. I mean, I thought that was Debbie Morgan at first, but apparently it's not Debbie Morgan. But yeah, the beautiful woman in the video with Rick, and apparently the woman on the song is not her either. It's Tina that's saying, "Come on, Rick, I'm tired. Let's go home." That's Tina. So yeah, you got that. You got Ghetto Life. Again, it's just from start to finish, every song on there just serves a purpose. Make Love to Me, all of that. It just serves a purpose. And Rick didn't leave anything to waste. And it's probably his legend album. You could argue that Come Get It was probably a legendary album from the standpoint of, okay, this is who Rick James is, this is who the Stone City Band is, but Street Songs just told you everything you needed to know about where Rick had been and where he was going to go. And he was just destined for stardom. Of course, that flame flickered after a while and burned out. And of course, he left us in 2004, but you can't tell the story of black music in that era, this late 70s and the early 80s and even to the mid 80s, without talking about Rick James. If you do, your discussion is incomplete and your homework is incomplete. And I implore you to give Rick his props as a musician, as I always do on this channel. There weren't too many people as brilliant a musician at that time as Rick. You had Quincy Jones. You had um Leon Silvers the third. You had Kashif. You had Roger Troutman, doing what he was doing with Zach. You had so many great. You had Larry Smith, the first hip hop super producer. There were some beasts on the boards back in the late 70s and early 80s, but I don't think anybody, Prince, Mike, but even from just what Rick was bringing to the table, you can't put Rick anywhere lower than 5 when we talk about the top producers and musicians of the 80s. You can't. If so, you're lying to yourself. Then that's my opinion. But if you have any memories of street songs, we'd love to know what you think. If you think my rating of Rick James as a top 5 musician in the 80s is a little too high or a little too low, let's talk about it. That's what the comments are for. Thank you guys for riding with me on the Groove Line. As always, contact information will be in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe and tap that notification bell so you're notified of all new videos that drop on the channel. And as you know by now, your boy talks back in the comments. So thank you guys for riding with me on the Groove Line. And until the next time we ride, may you find the groove, or may the groove find you.